I also came to understand that standing up for yourself doesn't always mean being the one who shouts the loudest. Sometimes, it requires doing something bold, something that sends a message so clear and unambiguous that it cannot be ignored. Draining the lake might have seemed extreme to some, but it was effective. Karen had finally gotten the point. She had not been back, and I sincerely doubted she ever would. A couple of days later, I ran into one of Karen's friends at the grocery store. The woman looked mortified, mumbling a half-hearted apology about not having realized it was really private property. I just gave a slight nod and said, "No hard feelings, but I hope you all understand where I'm coming from now." She nodded back, and I could see in her eyes that the message had been received loud and clear. By the end of that month, life around the lake had returned to its natural, quiet rhythm. There were no more unexpected visitors, no more shouting children or blaring music, just the gentle, soothing sounds of water lapping against the dock, the wind rustling through the trees, and Max's tail thumping a happy beat against the wooden boards as he watched the ducks float by. Looking back on it all, I don't regret a single action I took. Sometimes, when a person pushes you too far, you have no choice but to push back in a way they will never, ever forget. Karen thought she could take advantage of me, that I would simply roll over to avoid a conflict. She was wrong. I was not about to let anyone, HOA board member or not, walk all over my hard work and my peace. As I sat on the dock that final evening of summer, I watched the sunset paint the sky in brilliant shades of red and gold. The lake mirrored the colors perfectly, its surface calm and beautiful once again. I raised my beer in a silent toast, to the water, to Max, and to myself, for holding my ground. Karen might still be out there, telling her own version of the story, casting me as the grumpy old man who hates fun. But that didn't bother me in the slightest. People can say whatever they want. I know the truth. The truth is, I stood up for what was mine. And in doing so, I got my peace back. As I sat there on the dock that evening, with the last light of summer sinking below the horizon, I realized the fight with Karen was never really just about a lake. It was about respect. It was about knowing when to stop turning the other cheek and start standing up for yourself, even when it means making difficult and unconventional choices. That lake wasn't just water and mud to me. It was a living symbol of everything I had worked for my entire life. Every early morning, every arduous job, every scar on my hands had led me to this quiet slice of freedom. Draining the lake might have seemed extreme, but it was the only language Karen could understand, the only way to make her finally accept that my boundaries were not up for negotiation. And as I saw the lake, calm and beautiful once more, I knew without a doubt that I had done the right thing. By mid-morning, I heard the familiar sound of tires crunching on the gravel road. A caravan of SUVs and sedans pulled into the clearing, with the lead vehicle driven by none other than Karen herself. She stepped out, dressed in her usual immaculate attire, a crisp blouse and spotless white sneakers, clearly arriving with the full expectation of hosting another day of unauthorized fun on my land. The sight of her friends piling out of their cars, armed with coolers and floaties, made my blood simmer. Then, their eyes fell upon the lake. "What on earth happened here?" Karen shouted, throwing her arms wide in a theatrical gesture of disbelief. The others looked on in confusion, some of them muttering about how disgusting the mud looked. A couple of children pointed at the receded water line and wrinkled their noses in distaste. I emerged from my shed, my demeanor calm and collected. "Morning, Karen," I said, taking a slow, deliberate sip of my coffee. "The lake's a little low today. I guess you'll have to take your party somewhere else." She spun around to face me, her face flushed with anger. "Did you do this? Did you actually drain your own lake just to ruin our day?" I offered her a half-smile. "My lake. My choice. I told you that trespassing would not be tolerated. You refused to listen, so I made sure there wouldn't be anything left for you to trespass on." Her jaw dropped in astonishment. "You're insane. Do you have any idea how ridiculous this looks? You can't just ruin something that belongs to everyone." I cut her off, my voice sharp and clear. "Everyone? Let me remind you. Karen, this lake belongs to me, and me alone. It is not HOA property. It is not a community swimming pool. And it sure as hell is not your personal party venue. I bought it. I built that dock with my own 2 hands. And I am the one who takes care of it. You do not get to act like any of it is yours." Her friends began to shuffle their feet, their discomfort palpable. One of them whispered to another, "Maybe we should just leave." But Karen wasn't ready to back down. She pointed an accusatory finger at me. "This isn't over. The HOA will hear about this, and I will make sure they take decisive action. You can't just bully people because you have a piece of paper with your name on it." I laughed, a humorless, cutting sound. "Go ahead. Call whoever you want. I have every single one of my boundaries legally marked, and I have already spoken with the county about my property rights. You want to push me again? The next time, I will have a deputy here writing trespassing citations for every single one of your friends. Let's see how fun your little party is then." The group fell completely silent. Karen stood there, seething with impotent rage, but she had no comeback. One by one, her so-called supporters began to retreat, packing up their coolers and folding their chairs. Nobody wanted to get caught in the legal crossfire. By the time the last car had driven away, Karen was standing alone, glaring at me as if I had committed an unforgivable crime. "You're a bitter old man," she spat. "You'll end up all alone because of that miserable attitude of yours. Better to be alone than to be surrounded by people who have no respect," I retorted. "Now get off my land." She stomped back to her car, slamming the door so hard the frame rattled. With a squeal of tires, she sped off down the dirt road, leaving a cloud of dust in her wake. The silence that descended in her absence was golden. I walked down to the dock, with Max trailing behind me, and looked out at the shallow, muddy water. It wasn't the peaceful, beautiful lake I was used to, but it felt immensely satisfying to know that I had taken back control. Karen had been thoroughly humiliated in front of her friends, and I doubted she would attempt another stunt like that anytime soon. Still, I was not naive. Karen was the kind of person who neither forgave nor forgot. I could almost feel her down the road, scheming, trying to concoct her next move. But I was ready for whatever she decided to throw my way. That evening, as the setting sun painted the exposed mudflats with brilliant streaks of orange and gold, I walked back to the valve and began the slow process of refilling the lake. It would take time for the water to return to its usual level, but that was fine by me. Sometimes, you have to drain something completely dry just to make people understand its true worth. The lake took nearly a full week to return to its normal state. Every day, I would go down to check the water line, watching it creep slowly, inch by inch, back up the banks while Max sniffed inquisitively at the damp, muddy ground. It felt profoundly good to see the calm, reflective surface I loved so much being restored. The dock, though stained with dried mud, looked like a battle-hardened veteran, and it stood strong, much like I felt after having faced down Karen and her entitled crowd. During those days, the neighborhood gossip mill was working overtime. I overheard hushed conversations at the local store about the guy who drained his own lake just to spite the HOA. Some people seemed to think I had gone too far. Others, however, would quietly approach me and confess that they wished they had the courage to stand up to Karen the way I had. I didn't much care what any of them thought. As long as everyone now understood one fundamental truth, my property was not a free-for-all. Karen, surprisingly, remained silent. There were no more unannounced visits, no more raucous parties, no more unfamiliar cars parked on my land. I didn't fully trust her sudden silence, but I certainly welcomed it. Peace had finally returned to my sanctuary, and I was determined to hold on to it. A week after the major confrontation, a formal letter from the HOA arrived in my mail. I braced myself for trouble, perhaps a formal complaint, or even a legal threat. But what I found inside was almost comical. It was a stiffly worded reminder that while the HOA encourages the community's sharing of natural spaces, it also acknowledged that my property was, in fact, technically outside their direct jurisdiction. In other words, they had no legal ground to stand on, and they knew it. I pinned that letter to my refrigerator like a trophy. The following weekend, I was back in my usual spot on the dock with my fishing rod, the sun warm on my back, and Max curled up contentedly at my feet. The water was nearly back to its full level, glistening like a sheet of polished glass. I reflected on how close I had come to losing the very peace I had worked so tirelessly to create, all because of one entitled person who believed her desires outweighed my rights. But as I sat there, I realized something important. This entire ordeal had taught me more than just how to handle a Karen. It had served as a powerful reminder of why I fought so hard for this place to begin with. It was never about being exclusionary or keeping others out for the sake of it. It was about possessing something that was truly and completely mine, something earned through my own blood, sweat, and years of relentless hard work. That lake was my reward, my escape, and I would not allow anyone to take that away from me. I gripped the handle with both hands and threw my weight into twisting it. At first, the old metal protested with a loud groan, resisting the movement. But then, I heard the deeply satisfying rush of water beginning to surge through the outlet pipe. The sound grew into a low roar, a powerful, steady current pulling countless gallons of water out of the lake and sending them cascading down the creek bed below. I gave the valve a few more forceful turns to open it fully, then stepped back. I watched as the surface of the lake began to show the faintest signs of disturbance, the water level sinking so gradually that only someone who knew it as well as I did would notice. But I didn't stop there. I walked back to my truck, drove it around to the clearing, and parked it in a prominent position where everyone could see me. Karen was still there, holding her wine glass like a scepter, laughing with her friends as if she had won. When I stepped out of the truck, I didn't utter a single word. I just leaned against the hood and waited. It didn't take long for the effects to become obvious. Within half an hour, the shallow areas of the lake began to recede, exposing ugly patches of mud. The kids who had been splashing near the shore were the first to notice. Their joyful laughter turned into confused squeals as they suddenly found themselves standing ankle-deep in thick, sticky brown muck where clear water had been just moments before. The inflatable raft, which had been floating lazily, began to list to one side as the water line dropped, forcing the teenagers aboard to awkwardly drag it closer to the rapidly expanding shoreline. "What's going on?" one of the adults shouted, their voice laced with confusion. I crossed my arms over my chest and allowed a small smile to touch my lips. "Looks like the lake's a little low today," I called out. "Maybe it's time to wrap up the party." Karen's head whipped around, her sunglasses sliding down her nose as she finally took in the sight of her perfect lakeside soiree, transforming into a muddy disaster zone. "What did you do?" she shrieked, storming toward me. "Just a bit of routine maintenance," I replied calmly. "Figured I'd take care of it today, while I had some uninvited guests." Her face flushed a deep shade of red. "You can't do that. This is ridiculous. People are here trying to enjoy themselves." I raised a single eyebrow. "On my property, you mean? The same property I repeatedly told you to stay off of? You were warned, Karen." "I'm done talking." The music abruptly cut out as someone scrambled to save their speaker from the encroaching mud. The party atmosphere evaporated in an instant. Grills were hastily doused, chairs were folded, and coolers were dragged back toward the cars. The once cheerful gathering now looked like a scene of chaotic retreat, with people slipping and sliding in the mud, muttering angrily about the crazy guy who owns the lake. Karen, naturally, was not going to leave without a final volley. "You will regret this," she spat, her voice trembling with rage. "The HOA is going to hear all about this, and I will make sure you pay for ruining everyone's day." I stepped closer to her, my voice low but firm, each word deliberate. "You have been trespassing, Karen. Every single time you set foot on my land, you are breaking the law. Would you like me to start calling the sheriff every single weekend? Because I will." Her mouth opened, but no words came out. For the very first time since this whole ordeal began, I saw something in her eyes that I hadn't seen before: hesitation. Defeated, she turned on her heel, stomping back to her car while barking orders at her friends to pack up faster. Within an hour, the place was deserted. The dock, which had been crowded with lawn chairs and coolers, now stood stark and alone, looming over a wide, muddy flat where the water used to be. I walked down to the end of it, with Max trotting faithfully beside me, and looked out over what was left of the lake. The water line was down by at least 2 feet, and I knew it would take days to recover, even if I closed the valve right then. For the first time in weeks, a feeling of peace settled over me. It wasn't because I had drained the lake, but because I had finally sent a message so clear and so powerful that Karen could not possibly ignore it. As the sun began to dip below the horizon, I sat on the edge of the dock, with Max leaning against my side, and contemplated what would come next. Karen was not the type to give up easily. She would be back, in one form or another. But now, she knew I wasn't bluffing. I wasn't just some quiet man with a lake. I was a man who would fight, and fight hard, for what was his. The next morning, I woke early and made my way down to the lake, a steaming cup of coffee in hand. The sight that greeted me brought a grim smile to my face. The water level had dropped even further overnight, leaving behind long, ugly streaks of muddy shoreline. My once pristine, clear lake now resembled a shallow, murky puddle in places. The lower posts of the dock were fully exposed, caked in thick, drying muck. It was far from a pretty sight, but aesthetics were not the point. The point was that the lake was undeniably mine, and I had just proven it in the most dramatic way possible. I refused to take the bait. If I see a single person on my land again without my permission, I will treat it as a criminal act of trespassing. The sheriff's department will be called, and cars will be towed. That is my final warning. She rolled her eyes and turned her back to me. You're no fun at all. It's no wonder you live out there all by yourself. I offered no reply. I simply walked back to my truck, feeling the last vestiges of my patience wearing dangerously thin. I had given her more warnings than she deserved, but something told me she wouldn't stop until I forced her to regret her actions. That night, sitting on my dock with Max curled up beside me, I considered my options. I could continue to call the sheriff every time she decided to cross the line, or I could take a definitive action that would make her, and anyone else, think twice before ever messing with me again. I didn't have a concrete plan just yet, but I knew one thing for certain. If Karen wanted a war, I was done playing nice. It didn't take long for Karen to cross the line one last time. It was as if she couldn't help herself. People like her seem to thrive on pushing boundaries, just to see if they can make you snap. And after weeks of her relentless games, I was right on the verge of snapping. It was the first Saturday of July, a day I had meticulously planned for my own enjoyment. I had stocked up on all the essentials: cold beer, steaks marinating for the grill, fresh bait for a long evening of fishing. I headed out to the lake early that morning, determined to have a full day of peace, far away from people and their incessant nonsense. But as I pulled up, a familiar sickness churned in my stomach. The gate to my property was wide open, not just unlatched, but thrown open with blatant disregard. As I drove down the dirt road, I saw that it was riddled with tire tracks, cutting deep grooves into the soft ground, which was still damp from the week's rain. My gut clenched with dread before the full scene even came into view. There they were again. But this wasn't just a few people this time. This was a full-scale invasion. At least 20 cars were parked in every conceivable spot in the clearing, completely blocking access to my shed and obstructing half the road. My dock was swarming with strangers, their coolers stacked high, the air thick with smoke rising from multiple grills. Children were screaming and splashing in the water. A large inflatable pool had been anchored right near my favorite fishing spot, and someone had even set up a portable speaker that was blasting music loud enough to reverberate off the surrounding hills. And who was at the epicenter of this chaotic celebration? Karen, of course, standing there with her wine glass, laughing as if she were the proud host of a grand event. She didn't even have the decency to look guilty when she saw my truck. In fact, she waved. "Isn't this wonderful?" she shouted over the blare of the music. "I told everyone you wouldn't mind if we had a big 4th of July weekend celebration here." My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. I slammed the truck into park hard enough to make the tires crunch on the gravel, leaped out, and stormed down toward the water. Max ran at my side, barking furiously, as if he knew I was about to detonate. "What the hell is this?" I roared, my voice slicing through the party atmosphere. "Didn't I tell you on multiple occasions to stay off my property?" Karen just smirked, taking a slow sip of her drink. "Oh, calm down. We're celebrating. It's a holiday weekend. You can't seriously expect everyone to just sit at home when there's a perfect lake right here for the taking. I don't care if it's Christmas, the 4th of July, or your own birthday." I snapped back. "This is my land. You do not get to invite half the neighborhood to it, as if it's your personal resort." One of her friends, a man with a baseball cap and a smug grin, decided to chime in. "Come on, man. Don't be such a stick in the mud. It's just a lake. You're acting like it's made of gold or something." I rounded on him. "I don't know you, and I sure as hell didn't invite you. Pack your things and leave. All of you. Now." Karen's smile finally vanished. "You are being ridiculous. I am on the HOA board, and I say that we have every right to enjoy this land. It's a part of the community." I laughed, a bitter, harsh sound. "Community? You mean my private property? Show me where your name is written on the deed. Go ahead. I'll wait. She glared at me, clearly unprepared for such a forceful pushback. If you want to make this ugly, then go right ahead. But I can promise you, you won't win this fight. I have friends on the board, and if you're not careful, we will vote to open this lake to everyone, whether you like it or not. I took a step closer, my voice dropping to a low, sharp growl. You try it. I will take you and every last one of them to court. I will spend every single penny I have to my name to make sure that none of you ever come near this place again. You think I won't? Test me. The group fell silent. Karen's confident smirk faltered for the first time, but instead of backing down, she gave me a look of pure defiance. Fine. Call the sheriff if you want. But I'm not moving a single car until this party is over. That was the moment I knew. Words were useless. Talking to Karen was like shouting at a brick wall. She respected nothing but force, and I was finished trying to be polite. I left without saying another word. I got back in my truck, with Max leaping into the passenger seat, and drove back up the road. But I wasn't going home. I was heading to the far end of my property, to the spot where the old drainage system ran beneath the dam. That lake wasn't just for fishing. It was equipped with a maintenance outlet, a simple but highly effective drain I had installed years ago for water management purposes. With one strong twist of a valve, I could lower the water level fast enough to render the dock completely useless. If Karen and her friends wanted to keep throwing their parties, I was about to show them what a party looks like when there's no water left to enjoy. As I stood by the old, weathered valve, my hands dirty from years of work, I felt my white-hot anger cool and settle into something sharper, something colder. Resolve. Karen wanted to push me. Fine. I was about to push back so hard she'd never forget it. Once my decision was made, I didn't waste a second. I had reached my limit with Karen's arrogance, her entitled friends, and her delusional belief that my hard-earned property was just another public playground for the neighborhood. She was convinced she could walk all over me. That day, I was done being walked on. The drain valve was a piece of equipment I hadn't needed to touch in years, but I knew its mechanics perfectly. When I'd had the system installed, its purpose was for emergencies, like managing overflow during heavy storms. It was never intended for an act of petty revenge. But as I stood there, my gaze fixed on the heavy handle, I knew this wasn't petty. This was a matter of respect. This was about drawing a definitive line in the sand that Karen would never even think of crossing again. I've never been a man who goes looking for a fight. In my experience, most disputes can be resolved with a firm word and a level head. But after the stunt Karen pulled with her impromptu, uninvited lake party, I knew that my usual approach would be insufficient. If I gave her an inch, she would seize the entire property and act as if it had always been hers. So, I resolved to handle the situation in the way I knew best, direct and face-to-face. The very next morning, I spotted her. She was near the community garden by the entrance road, pruning flowers with an air of ownership over the entire area. I parked my truck, took a fortifying breath, and walked directly toward her. She watched me approach and straightened up, brushing non-existent dirt from her immaculate white shirt. "Well, if it isn't our beloved lake guardian," she said, punctuating the title with one of her fake laughs. "Have you come to scold me again?" "I'm here to make things crystal clear," I stated, my voice even. "Yesterday was the absolute last time anyone will trespass on my property. There will be no more parties. No more uninvited strangers. You will inform your friends, your neighbors, and anyone else you've been inviting that my lake is strictly off limits." She tilted her head, feigning confusion. "Oh, come now. You can't be serious. We were just having a bit of harmless fun, and nobody got hurt. You're acting as if I broke into your house." I crossed my arms, my posture unyielding, my tone steady but firm. "It's the exact same principle. You do not possess the right to set foot on my land without my explicit permission. If it happens again, I will not be coming here to have a discussion. I will be calling the sheriff. That is a promise." Her smile grew strained, and for the first time, I detected a genuine flicker of annoyance in her eyes. "You don't have to threaten me. I'm simply trying to foster a sense of community. People in this neighborhood respect me because I work to make things better." A dry chuckle escaped my lips, devoid of any humor. "Better for whom? Do you honestly believe that giving away something that doesn't belong to you makes you some kind of hero? You're mistaken, Karen. All it makes you is a trespasser." She stared at me for a long, silent moment, clearly unaccustomed to being so directly contradicted. Finally, with a dramatic sigh, she waved me away. Fine, have your precious lake all to yourself. But don't expect anyone to like you when you choose to live like this. Being liked was the least of my concerns. What I cared about was my peace. And if preserving that peace meant being cast as the villain in her narrative, then so be it. I turned and walked away, feeling confident that I had made my point unequivocally. Or so I believed. A few days of welcome tranquility followed. I would head to the lake after work, cast a line into the water, and savor the quiet evenings with Max at my feet. It felt good to reclaim my space. Yet, deep down, I couldn't shake the persistent feeling that Karen was not yet done with me. She was the type of woman to nurse a grudge, and I had just handed her a significant one. Sure enough, my instincts were correct. A week later, a letter from the HOA arrived in my mailbox. While it wasn't addressed to me by name, the message was unmistakably targeted. It was a formal proposal to designate the lake as a site for seasonal community events, accompanied by a vaguely worded suggestion that property boundaries might need to be re-evaluated for the sake of fairness. I laughed out loud as I read it, but it was a bitter, mirthless laugh. She was now attempting to use the HOA as a weapon to pressure me. It was then that I realized conversation was futile. Karen was a person who only understood the language of consequences. I had no desire to escalate the situation, but I was beginning to feel as if I had no other choice. The next time I saw her was at the communal mailboxes. I approached just as she was gathering her mail. She glanced at me, a smirk playing on her lips, and said, "Did you receive the letter? I think it's a wonderful idea. Everyone could certainly use a little more fun." But as I drew closer, a sense of unease began to creep in. Even before my truck reached the driveway, I could hear the faint, thumping bass of music, loud, fast-paced, and utterly alien to the peaceful atmosphere of my sanctuary. My jaw instinctively tightened. I slowed my approach, and as I rounded the final bend in the road, my stomach plummeted. The clearing beside my dock had been transformed into a makeshift parking lot. At least 6 cars were haphazardly crammed into the space I kept clear for my own truck and trailer. Some were parked so precariously close to my shed that I feared they might have scratched the siding. And down by the water, it was pure chaos. There were people everywhere, at least 20 of them, perhaps more, laughing, drinking, and making themselves entirely at home. Folding tables laden with coolers and food had been erected. A group of kids was splashing wildly in the shallows, churning up clouds of mud, while 2 men I had never seen before stood on my dock, casting lines with fishing rods that weren't mine. To add to the surreal scene, a small inflatable raft with 3 teenagers lounging on it floated near the center of the lake, as if they were guests at an all-inclusive resort. I brought the truck to a hard stop and climbed out, my work boots crunching on the gravel with more force than usual. Max leaped out after me, his ears erect and alert, as if he could sense the tension radiating from me. My eyes scanned the crowd, and it didn't take long to find her. There she was, Karen, comfortably seated in one of my own lawn chairs as if she were the queen of this entire domain. She wore oversized sunglasses and a wide-brimmed hat, holding a glass of what appeared to be white wine. "Karen," I said, my voice cutting sharply through the noise as I strode toward her. "What the hell is going on here?" She turned her head slowly, a disingenuous, sweet smile spreading across her face. "Oh, hello there. We're just having a little gathering. Isn't it a glorious day for the lake?" "A gathering?" I barked, my anger rising. "On my property? Using my dock, my chairs, with my damn shed blocked by all these cars. Did our conversation last week completely slip your mind?" Karen waved a dismissive hand, as if I were the one overreacting. "Oh, don't be so uptight. Nobody is harming anything. We're simply enjoying nature. You can't possibly keep this entire place to yourself all the time. It's just selfish." I felt my blood begin to boil. Selfish? I purchased this land with my own hard-earned money. I maintain it. I pay the taxes on it. And you believe you have the right to invite the entire neighborhood here without so much as asking me. A few of her companions had started to watch the exchange, whispering to each other behind their drinks. One man let out a chuckle, clearly finding the situation amusing. "Come on, buddy," he said condescendingly. "It's just a lake. You need to relax." I closed the distance between us, my voice dropping to a low, dangerous tone. "You have 5 minutes to pack up and leave." Every car, every cooler, every single one of you. If you are not gone by then, I am calling the sheriff, and I will have every last vehicle here towed. This is criminal trespassing." Karen's smile evaporated. "You wouldn't dare," she hissed. "Do you have any idea how ridiculous you'll look, calling the police on families who are just trying to enjoy a beautiful day?" "I don't care how it looks," I snapped back. "You are on my land. Get off." For a tense moment, I thought she might actually refuse to move. Her jaw was set, and her eyes flashed with defiance. But when I pulled out my phone and prepared to dial, she let out a long, exasperated sigh and gestured to her group. "Fine. Everyone, pack it up. The man wants to be alone with his precious lake." A chorus of grumbles and complaints followed, but they began to gather their things. Children whined, and adults muttered under their breath about people who don't know how to share, but their opinions were of no consequence to me. One by one, they hauled their coolers and chairs back to their cars. As Karen passed me on her way out, she stopped just long enough to deliver a venomous glare. "This isn't over," she said quietly, her voice dripping with malice. "You can't keep everyone away forever. Sooner or later, you'll come around to my way of thinking." I didn't dignify that with a response. I just stood there, my arms crossed, and watched her get into her car and drive away. Max came to my side, nudging my hand with his nose as if he could sense I was still on edge. After the last car had disappeared, I surveyed the mess they had left in their wake. Trash littered near the dock, muddy footprints smeared across my chairs, and the lingering smell of smoke from their cheap charcoal grill. It felt as if my peace had been violently trampled, leaving behind a residue of profound disrespect. That night, as I sat on the dock watching the sunset, I came to a firm realization. Karen wasn't just an annoyance. She was deliberately testing my limits. And if I didn't push back with overwhelming force, she would never stop. She laughed, a dismissive, airy sound, as if I had just told a hilarious joke. "Oh, don't be so dramatic. It's just a little bit of fun. You have so much space here. It's not as if you even notice when someone decides to take a quick swim." I stepped closer to her. "I notice. And if it happens again, I will be calling the sheriff. This is not a playground for you or your friends." Her expression shifted instantly from smug amusement to raw anger. "There's no need to be so theatrical. It's just water." I saw no point in continuing the argument. I turned and walked away, but a deep-seated instinct told me this feud was far from over. Karen was not the type to concede defeat. She was the type to push relentlessly until she either got her way or encountered a force that pushed back with greater intensity. The very next weekend proved my gut feeling correct. I arrived at the lake with Max, only to find my gates swinging wide open. A set of fresh tire tracks carved a path through the soft dirt, leading directly to my dock. Following them, I found 3 unfamiliar cars parked in the clearing by my shed. And there they were again, Karen and her entourage, lounging in my chairs as if they held the deed to the place. This time, I didn't hesitate. I marched directly up to Karen. "Get off my property. Now," she smirked, taking a delicate sip from her wine glass. "Oh, don't be like that. We're simply enjoying the view. You're hardly ever here during the week, so why should this beautiful spot remain empty?" "Because it belongs to me," I retorted, my voice sharp. "You have no legal right to be here, and you are fully aware of it." She rolled her eyes dismissively. "You're being completely unreasonable. If you would just allow people to enjoy the lake, you might actually make some friends instead of enemies." I pointed firmly toward the road. "This is your last warning. Pack up your things and leave, or I will call the sheriff and have every single one of your cars towed." A wave of grumbling and muttered complaints spread through the group, but they reluctantly began to gather their belongings. As she walked past me, Karen paused, giving me a final look as sharp and cold as a shard of glass. That single glare communicated more than words ever could. She wasn't finished. Not by a long shot. I had no inkling of how far she was willing to push her agenda, but I could feel a storm brewing on the horizon. I had assumed that our last confrontation, with its explicit threat of involving law enforcement, would finally deter Karen. Most rational people, when faced with the imminent arrival of the sheriff, would reconsider their actions. But Karen was not like most people. She possessed a stubborn, unyielding pride, the kind that feeds on challenging boundaries and defying authority. It was naive of me to believe a single warning would be enough to frighten her off. It was a beautiful, warm Saturday afternoon, and I had set out for the lake seeking tranquility. I'd been awake since dawn, mending a broken fence post at the far edge of my property, and by midday, all I craved was a cold beer and a lazy afternoon with Max. The sun was high in the sky, and I could already envision myself settled under the familiar shade of the oak tree, watching the gentle ripples on the water as Max chased dragonflies along the shore. "Wouldn't it be just lovely if all the neighbors could enjoy this magnificent view?" she remarked once, her smile a masterclass in saccharine insincerity. Her tone wasn't one of friendly suggestion. It was laced with an entitlement that implied she believed she had a right to what was not hers. I politely but firmly rebuffed her advances, stating clearly that it was private property. I owned it, the HOA did not, and sharing it was not on my agenda. For a time, she seemed to back down, but the displeasure in her eyes at being denied was palpable. I had a gnawing feeling she wasn't finished. My intuition was confirmed one Saturday evening. I had driven up to my cabin, anticipating a quiet night of fishing. Max was in the back seat, his head happily hanging out the window, his tail thumping with excitement for our lakeside retreat. But as I pulled into my driveway, an unsettling feeling washed over me. The air was filled with noise, raucous laughter, overlapping shouts, and the unmistakable beat of music. My stomach knotted. There was no reason for anyone else to be there. I parked my truck and cautiously followed the sounds down the path leading to the water. The scene that greeted me sent a jolt of anger through my veins. A crowd of at least 10 people was spread across my dock and shoreline, as if they were at a public resort. They had set up lawn chairs, their coolers were overflowing, and a grill was sending plumes of smoke into the air near the water's edge. My dock, my chairs, my personal space, all occupied. And there, presiding over the chaos like a monarch, sipping from a wine glass and issuing directives, was Karen. For a moment, I was paralyzed, the sound of my own blood pounding in my ears. This lake, my cherished sanctuary of silence, had been grotesquely transformed into a boisterous circus, and Karen was the gleeful ringmaster. I clenched my jaw, drawing a deep, steadying breath. I held my tongue for now, but as I stood there, a silent observer watching them trample over everything I held dear, one thought crystallized in my mind with absolute clarity. This conflict would not be resolved with a polite conversation. Karen had a talent for making her presence felt. From the very first HOA meeting where I saw her, she carried herself as if she were the sole authority of the entire neighborhood. She embodied the type of person who believes every fence, every mailbox, and every blade of grass in a shared space falls under their personal dominion. At first, I dismissed her as just another overzealous volunteer with too much time on her hands. I never imagined her ambitions would extend to my lake. It began subtly, with probing questions masked as casual chit-chat. One morning, as I was organizing my tackle box on the dock, the sound of footsteps on the wooden planks made me turn. There she was, clad in a pristine white blouse and clutching a clipboard as if conducting an official inspection. "What a truly beautiful spot you have here," she began, her voice dripping with that familiar condescending sweetness. "Do you ever consider letting the neighbors use the lake? It seems like such a terrible waste for only one person to enjoy." My response was civil but resolute. "It's private property, ma'am. I purchased it. I'm the one who maintains it, and I keep it this way for a reason. This is my place to find peace." Her smile faltered for a fraction of a second before reforming. "Oh, of course, I understand," she said, though the look in her eyes betrayed her words. "But wouldn't it be a wonderful gesture to share? Just imagine the neighborhood children swimming here during the summer, or families having picnics by the water. We are all part of the same community, after all." I held my ground. This isn't a public park. If someone desires a lake of their own, they can do precisely what I did, work hard and purchase one. That answer clearly displeased her. I watched her jaw tighten before she managed to force another smile and pivot away. I had hoped that would be the end of it, but I was mistaken. Within a week, her friendly visits became more frequent. She would meander by while I was working on my property, peppering me with questions about my boundary lines or making passive-aggressive remarks about the unfairness of the lake not being under HOA control. She even floated the idea of the HOA organizing community events on the land adjacent to my shoreline, an idea I shot down every single time. One day, she escalated her campaign. I was in the process of hauling a new load of firewood to my cabin when I heard shouting from the direction of the lake. I walked down to investigate and discovered two children splashing at the water's edge, their bicycles carelessly discarded on my land. A woman I didn't recognize, who was clearly an acquaintance of Karen's, was perched on my dock, her feet dangling in the water. I approached them. "Can I help you?" She looked up at me as if I were the one intruding. Karen said it was perfectly fine. She told us you wouldn't mind. That was the moment my patience began to fray. I informed them, in no uncertain terms, that this was private property and they needed to leave immediately. The woman rolled her eyes but eventually complied, gathering the children and departing while muttering about my selfishness. Later that day, I confronted Karen directly. "Do not send people onto my land," I said, struggling to keep my voice even. That first summer was a flurry of activity. I invested my time in restoring the place, diligently clearing away overgrown brush, constructing a solid wooden dock that jutted out into the cool water, and erecting a small shed to house my fishing equipment. Each swing of the hammer, every plank I meticulously laid, was a potent reminder that this domain was mine. There were no foremen, no pressing deadlines, no intrusive city sounds, just the tranquil company of myself, the lake, and the vast, open sky. I would often spend hours simply observing the shifting light as it danced across the water from sunrise to sunset. I familiarized myself with every contour of the shoreline, every ancient tree that bowed toward the water, and every hidden cove where the fish were known to congregate. The lake seamlessly integrated itself into the rhythm of my life. My routine often involved a cooler stocked with beer and my trusted old fishing rod. I'd settle under the sprawling branches of a large oak tree with Max, my loyal golden retriever, who would be contentedly resting at my side. Max's affection for the lake was nearly as deep as my own. He would joyfully splash about in the shallows, chasing after tossed sticks or playfully barking at the ducks that dared to drift too close to our shore. My nephew visited on occasion, and I took great pleasure in teaching him the art of baiting a hook, a skill my own father had passed down to me. The sheer delight on his face when he reeled in his first fish was a reward far greater than any paycheck. But the lake was more than just a venue for pleasant times. It was my solace when life's burdens became too heavy. After my father passed away, I found myself sitting on that dock long after the sun had set, allowing the silent, dark water to absorb the weight of my grief as the stars emerged one by one. Years later, when I contemplated the difficult decision of selling my construction business, the answer came to me in the profound stillness of the lake at dawn. It felt as though every significant memory, every critical decision, was filtered through this place, as if the water itself could listen and safeguard my deepest secrets. For the longest time, my solitude was undisturbed. My property lines were clearly demarcated, the access path was secured by a fence, and I was careful to respect the HOA's jurisdiction over the surrounding roads and community trails. Their purview was the nearby residential areas, but my land was distinct, a private, outright purchase, legally and properly recorded with a deed bearing my name. That was how it was meant to function, at least. Then, the composition of the HOA board changed. Initially, I paid little attention. Their standard newsletters about landscaping regulations and trash collection schedules, none of which pertained to my property, came and went. But one new member, a woman with a sharp tongue and an imperious demeanor whom everyone referred to as Karen, began to make uninvited appearances. She would make pointed comments about the beauty of my lakefront and question why I insisted on keeping it private. Have you ever been pushed to a point where your only option was to teach someone a lesson they would carry with them for the rest of their days? That was my reality, standing at the edge of a lake I owned, a lake I had poured my sweat and savings into. I was forced to watch a crowd of strangers revel on my property, all thanks to a domineering woman from the HOA, a Karen, who operated as if the rules were merely suggestions for other people. When she finally went too far, auctioning off my private lakefront to her friends for a free party, I didn't waste my breath on arguments. I chose action. Their day of stolen leisure, let's just say, dissolved into a quagmire of mud, utter chaos, and a thick, satisfying layer of regret. A decade ago, I purchased this property. The moment my boots touched the soil, I knew I had acquired something far more profound than just acreage and a body of water. I had bought myself a piece of freedom. After a lifetime spent in the grueling world of construction, where my days were long and my energy was poured into every hammered nail and raised beam, I yearned for a sanctuary that was unequivocally mine. This lake, with its mirror-like surface reflecting the stoic, towering pines, was the culmination of all those years of hard labor that had left my hands calloused and my back in a state of constant protest. I can still vividly recall that first morning I stood on the shoreline. It was the heart of late spring, and the air carried the rich, earthy scent of recent rain mixed with the sharp fragrance of pine needles. A delicate mist drifted across the water's surface like a ghostly veil, and the world was silent save for the melodic calls of birds and the gentle, rhythmic whisper of water caressing the bank. Something deep within me, a feeling I hadn't experienced in years, began to stir, a profound and quiet sense of pride. This wasn't merely a parcel of land. It was my refuge, my personal escape from the relentless noise of the world.